All right, Omari, thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. I know we've
Yo,
met in the past a couple times, spoken before, but I guess just to start, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do.
oh man, you asked the hardest questions first. My name's Omari Akil. I do a lot of stuff. Primarily, kind of right now, everything's focused on tabletop games. So, yeah, I run a company called Colorway Game Labs, and we actually are a publisher. I design games and publish them under Colorway Game Labs. And so we focus on games really that highlight sort of like Black culture, Black history, and we're kind of taking that into another realm here in a second. But yeah, that's Colorway Game Labs. I also produce content around board games. I've been doing some board game music and RPG music lately, so that's another little fun side project. And I generally am also just a freelance designer developer, so I've worked with several other companies on game designs, from Home Alone to the Dark Quarter, which is like a fantasy New Orleans murder mystery game. So it personally, like, I'm all over the place, and really it's just about the creativity for me. I love games. I love doing whatever I can to just like add to the gaming industry and community. So yeah, that's the short version.
Very nice. And I know you used to go by Board Game Brothers, so what changed? Well, what caused like the rebrand? Like, what was the motive behind that?
Yeah, so Board Game Brothas was, that was an idea that me and my brother were gonna kind of run a company together, and the idea behind the rebrand was several things kind of adding on top of each other. So one of those things being that we knew that in order for us to thrive, we were going to grow, and we were going to need some help just kind of filling out what our company was and what we wanted to do. And part of the brother's name was the fact that we were also brothers, not just that we were Black. But
Yeah.
so wanting to invite more people in, and understanding also that, like, for us, we see Black culture and specifically hip hop, because a lot of our games surround that culture, as just being so just like immersive and expansive in terms of global culture in general. So we wanted to actually invite more people. We didn't want people to think this was like just a Black company, or that we only made games for Black folks, knowing that, like, but we are going to highlight that culture in all the games that we create. And Colorway Game Labs, we both sneakerheads, so Colorway just hit us in the face as a thing that we understand. It speaks to the language of what we love, and we were like, yeah, it sounds great. And the labs part was important too, because coming into this industry, being one of the only sort of like Black publishers, trying to build and grow specifically in tabletop and in board games, um, it felt like an experiment. And it felt like a lot of the games, like when we talk to people about our games, when we talk to retailers about our games, they don't know how they're going to perform. They're like, well, yeah, how does this rap game fit into the rest of our merchandise? How do our customers feel about it? A lot of the retailers and stuff that we talk to are not predominantly Black customers. So it also just feels like an experiment. It feels like what we're doing is different for the industry, and it makes a lot of our business practices really challenging and really confusing, in terms of like outcomes and stuff. So and the types of games that we make, I like making weird games that kind of break the mold. So the name really just kind of brought together all of those things.
Very nice. So now more of some like easy layup questions. What's your favorite board game to play?
Ooh, you see, mixing it up again.
Yeah,
You said to play, because that's a different answer
it
to my
is.
favorite board game.
Right.
So, I mean, probably my favorite board game to play is, I think it's still Arcadia Quest. I think that one goes down as my favorite to play. Um, the two top tier games for me, Eclipse, which is a giant sort of space drama board game. 4X game is what it's called, because you explore and eventually exterminate your opponents. I always forget the middle two X's. But in our Arcadia Quest is a dice rolling, like skirmish dungeon crawling type game, and I just love dice. So you give me a game where I can, roll a handful of dice, more like 2 handfuls of dice, and I'm happy, and I get to kill some monsters and stuff. So and that one also is designed by Eric Lang, which is cool. It's another Black designer, one of the top designers in the gaming industry. So yeah, it checks all my boxes.
Yeah, you kind of rolled right into my next question. So, who are some of
Yeah.
your favorite creators and why?
Oh, that's such a good, like, right now the creators that excite me the most are creators that are just challenging the industry in a lot of different ways, and Eric Lang is one of them. And I think Eric is doing it from a much higher level now, and he's finding all these awesome people and supporting them and making sure that they're doing cool stuff. But people who like boots on the ground are just like crushing it. Banana Chan is one of my favorite designers, and just people in the industry for just constantly just challenging what it means to create games, and what types of things we can put into games. And she's actually doing a lot of really awesome, like, talking about design on YouTube lately. So a person I appreciate who is also like giving that knowledge back to the community and helping hopefully to create more game designers who are just doing wild stuff. But yeah, like, oh, there's so many cool people out there. One of the people I brought on to work with us at Gen Con, Terrence Harden, has developed Pocket Spades, which is like a twist on the game Spades. And again, just taking an approach that is, taking something very, very, very familiar and loved, but then creating something extra cool with it. I gotta just like appreciate and try to support people like that. So I'm excited really that I just get to know all these people and hang out with them sometimes now that I've been in the industry for a while.
Yeah.
That's the extra cool bit. They're actually friends now, which is awesome.
We talked about this a little bit before we started too, but what are you currently working on?
Currently, well, we got a lot in the works still. We're trying to finalize and get Hoop Gods manufactured. That was our second Kickstarter, and it's a 3-on-3 street basketball game. Where one of the tricky parts about this game and finishing it is this entire time, I had this vision for a game that could be put on tables at gaming events and have like real tournaments being played. And the challenge for me in that is like I want to make sure that the game like plays well and plays to the level that people will accept it as that. And I'm trying my hardest to get it there on the first try, which might be a mistake. It's delayed the game quite a bit to just make sure I'm getting it right. But I think, if I'm trying to stay true to my vision, that's the direction that I'm trying to go. Yeah, I got to do it right. So trying to finish that up. But I also, the Dark Quarter, I'm working on, actually, that's a lot of my stuff this week and next week. I'm writing a story inside that game. So I get to take one of the main characters and build out their backstory as a part of that game. And it's cool because it has an app attached. So you play the board game, but it has an app that kind of narrates and gives you all the storytelling elements. And when you talk to a character in the game, they have some prompts and you get some options for how you want to interact with that character. And then you select on the app and then it kind of tells you what happened. So getting to come into games from that side, sort of, I get to tell more stories, I get to build characters, but it's still a board game. So that's been exciting too, just getting into that. But other than that, I've just been writing raps about board games and RPGs, which is hilarious and exciting almost every time.
That's really interesting to like hear about, the way that you're trying to implement like technology with more of the traditional, board games. Because when we grew up, that wasn't, you didn't have a phone, you didn't have, you just sat down at a table with some friends, you played the game, like whether it's at lunch, at home,
Mhm.
sleepovers, whatever. Um, this is, and this is like an off the cuff question that you got me kind of like thinking about now too. So there's definitely some intersection between like video games and like board games. How do you draw some of that more, video gaming crowd over to the more tabletop side?
Oh, that's a question that we struggle with. But also, to be completely honest, another reason we did the rebrand and we didn't add board game to the name, just understanding how games in general and how they're all connected. Uh, we recognized that and said, you know what, board games will enter into digital spaces, and like we knew that going in, and now we're seeing them enter digital spaces in way more variety of ways. Some apps, some games just become ports on game websites. Some apps have companions that you can get extra content out of. Some apps are requiring it, and then you have third party apps that are able to kind of intermingle with board games that don't have apps. And so just how quickly we're seeing that space change is I think encouraging, but it's also scary. Like, I don't know, especially being a small publisher, that I have the capacity to even enter into that easily or do it quickly to try to, kind of like stay pace with the rest of the industry. But it's cool. I love it. I love technology. I came from computer science. I was a programmer. Like, these are things that I'm really, kind of accustomed to dealing with and seeing. So it is nice to see it in board games, though. I think for the most part, board games are, the physicality is what makes them the most unique and interesting. So, there'll always be that element to it. I think that's really important. So I'm not afraid of it. Let's just see what happens.
Right. Like I think that's one of the unique components about board games. Like sometimes me personally, I like to just unplug. I like to not have a bunch of like, screens in front of my face, like a whole bunch of light, just like, especially as I get older, I notice more and more. Like
Yes.
if I stare at the screen too long, like my eyes are just like, twitching and bug out in my head. So like I do like to sit down, especially like, and these are more like family games, but like simple, quick, 15-20 minute games that, me and my friends and family can like play together and have fun with versus just like sitting on the phone watching videos or like playing video games for hours too. So I definitely think there's a strong space for board games in the future, maybe even stronger, like when you think about it, because you know, going into the me having a kid thing, I'm like, I'm going to have to teach my kid, you need to unplug sometimes, get away from this iPad, get away from, at, probably at that point, get out of the metaverse, come live in the real world for a little
You're
bit.
you're not wrong.
So you touched on this, but speaking of like the beginning, what got you started in this area?
It was my brother. Is like I was playing games. I've always been a gamer, like since I could touch a controller, really, or a keyboard. I was on PC, I think, first. And I have always been interested in games, and I kind of rediscovered board games later in life. I think I was like 26, 27, looking for, something to do, looking for community, and found board games and fell in love with it, bought way too many. And then my brother just comes sliding in with this board game idea about, a hip hop career. And I'm like, well, I guess we got to make that. If that sounds cool. And that was literally it. It was like we made Rap Godz, or started making Rap Godz after that conversation. And it was, I'm just here now, 3 years and some change later.
Yeah, like I remember when I first met you, like you were really the first company that was making board games with a lot of like some of the like interests I have, like, hip hop, music in general. You mentioned sneakers earlier, like a lot of me and my co-founders are big sneakerheads. So, That resonates with me. Like all of these things that you're speaking of, I never really saw it in board games. It's always like,
Yeah.
fantasy elements or like capitalism seems to be big in a lot of board games, so things like that, where I didn't really see
Yes.
things that were quite a part of our culture. So like that immediately was like very interesting to me, like your kind of unique spin there. Speaking of that, what spurs your creativity? What gets your creative juices kind of flowing?
Realistically, and it's taken me a while to just kind of admit this to myself, but it's music. It's always been music.
Yeah.
It's always been like I have several playlists that are just like for creative vibes. I'm listening to right now, I'm listening to a lot of like sort of connected to New Orleans music, Southern Gothic, like things with sort of Caribbean, sort of Haitian voodoo elements, like because I'm writing a game about sort of that world and that narrative in a more magical sense. But I need that music to kind of like keep me in it and to keep me flowing. So yeah, I make Spotify playlists or seek them out for really whatever kind of project it is I'm working on. Yeah, when I was working on Hoop Gods, there's actually a really good like sports video game playlist that I like to listen to. And
Okay.
so it has all those jams from like the Madden games and the SSX games, probably some 2K games in there too. Somebody was smart enough to bring all that music together in one place. And like from playing those games growing up and even as an adult, that was the music. So now when I'm working on a basketball game, that's the music I listen to. And I can step away and like write something. If I have an idea for a song, do that. That gets me going. That can often just like propel me into the next project or whatever other thing that I'm doing. So yeah, it's funny. I just like realistically kind of made that realization okay for myself. I was like, no, you just let the music drive everything. Just lean into it. It's way easier that way.
Right. So you're kind of leading me into the next question too. So, like when you're actually designing these games, like what are some of the critical components that you're thinking about?
My I don't know if this is normal for everybody, but my general kind of like take when I'm going into game design is there's a couple things that I just want to make sure that I touch on. One is I want to provide usually a very specific moment in a game that I think is really cool, really interesting. And for every game, it's a little bit different. But usually I go into a game with like, okay, this is the moment that I want to have happen in my game. And I think in Rap Godz, it was beef. It was like everything about that game is cool and interesting, in terms of like how we do the storytelling, like all of that was intentional. But we were like, you know what, we can't realistically do a hip hop game without providing that moment of like tension and I guess controversy or just conflict, right? You're constantly creating conflict, but we wanted it specifically in Rap Gods, and rap beef was the best way to do that. But we didn't want an entire game about that. So we, made it a small part of the game, but it's still the most thrilling. And I knew that injecting, this sort of moment where you could start a beef, you can win it or lose it. There's always a chance you can win or lose. And so it's always a risk. And we just gave that to players just a couple times in each game, and every time it's impactful. So it was like that. It was like we created this moment of like, oh yeah, really, you're gonna play that card? Well, here you got some beef now, just like, and that's a thing that just from growing up playing spades, playing dominoes, it's like that take that moment is always there. So it's like I just want to create these little moments. So I usually have something like that. And the other thing that I like to do is surprise players. And I usually look for an opportunity to surprise them. And that could be with a game mechanic specifically. They're like, oh, wow, I would never think that doing this with these components would work, but wow, look how well it looks, or look how well it works. So that other thing is surprise. And I think we surprise people. I actually have a game coming out early next year about being an ICU doctor. And this is a game we're working on with doctors. And I think we surprised people in that game. We gave them an option to both and it requires a little explanation, because in real life, like oftentimes there's not always an option to save a patient, but you can make them more comfortable at the moment that they're dying, right? And that's technically like a medical win. And so the fact that we inside our game made it possible for you to have a patient die, but you can still win the game is something that surprises people. It's like, we don't think about that in terms of like medicine or how things work. Like, and so the fact that we like injected that into the game, every time somebody comes across that, they're like, oh wow. And so those are kind of the two things I tend to hyper focus on, just from a design standpoint. When you get into development and actually, you know, turning it into a product, a lot of things move and shift, but I try to keep some of like those two things kind of core to my designs.
That's really, really interesting to like hear you like talk about it from the design perspective. Because like, I've just been a player of games, and I'm thinking back, hearing you talking like, the Uno reverse card at the right moment provides that moment. You play Monopoly, somebody lands on the property, and all of a sudden they go bankrupt. It provides that moment.
Yeah.
Magic the Gathering, things are going one way, and somebody pulls out the card, and the game completely changes. So like, it's really cool to hear that, you're taking a lot of intentionality with creating those moments in the games as well.
Because that's what you remember, right? Like those are
Right.
the moments you remember. So creating memorable moments, I mean, you could just phrase it that way, is key. And like, we were playing a game at Gen Con, we had a live playing of Hoop Gods, and we literally, and I put this card in the game and I never actually had a chance to see it work. We put a Hail Mary card in the game because people were like, well, what if I'm losing and I'm on the other half of the court? I can't shoot or anything. They're like, okay, great. And we put that in the game just to have that opportunity. And then I saw it happen live on stage. Somebody used the Hail Mary card and made a shot from halfway across the court, and it went in, and then they ended up winning the game. So it's like, just the fact that, yeah, and that's what's so important about like feedback and listening to players during play testing. Is like, that card wouldn't be in the game unless somebody complained about it. But then once I put it in there, I was like, oh yeah, this is a moment, and when it happens, it's going to be magical and people will remember. And that's what's important.
Well, that translates to real life too. You're in a basketball game, somebody hits a buzzer beater. The feeling of that is so different than like, the team just blew the other team out by like 20
Oh
points.
yeah.
That's not really that exciting, but like, you watch videos online today, and there are always clips of somebody getting like crossed over, somebody hitting a buzzer beater, somebody like dunking on somebody. Like those are the
Yeah.
things that you remember, not necessarily like, well, the game was won,
Yeah.
whatever.
Epic fails too. That's a fun one to watch. I had this was a play test I did a long time ago, but I still remember it because it was a woman who was playing who was like, I don't know anything about basketball, and basically crossed over three of her opponent's teammates, and then took a wide open shot and just like missed it completely. And I thought that was the most hilarious thing. I was like, all right, that works. That could happen in real life. I like it. I want that. Keeping it.
Yep. So we were talking about this too a little bit before the call, but with every company, there's logistics that goes into being successful, right? So what are some of the logistics that go into running a board game company?
Oh wow. It's seriously intense. For board games, generally speaking. Card games, there's some exceptions, but when you start getting into the number of components that we have in our games, you're dealing with overseas manufacturing like 90% of the time, probably 99% of the time. And that presents its own problems, just from just mostly it's communication. It's making sure that you're getting exactly the product that you want. um, Oftentimes if there's communication barriers with language specifically, but sometimes just like the time difference and just the scheduling and trying to make sure that things are happening on time and correctly and the way you want it when you really have like almost no visibility. That's the tricky part, that people don't really connect the dots when you start working like overseas, is you're giving up a lot of control in a sense that you just can't see what's going on half of the time. And hopefully you have more communication, and sometimes it's better. We work with a manufacturer that does a really good job, and that's why we're working with them, because otherwise it would be too big of a hurdle for us. So you have that, and then trying to get your products distributed. We're actually a little bit lucky in board games that we have quite a few, because of Kickstarter and because of the growth of kind of like self-publishing. There's a lot of companies that specifically do board game logistics operations. So they get all the games from the manufacturer, they store them, they ship them out for you. But you have to, obviously pay for those sort of services and make sure that your sort of business model and the way that you're working kind of works with that, whether that's having a smooth pipeline from your website to the distribution company, or just making sure that you're transferring all the information properly when you do, if you're having to do it manually. There's a lot of that, and then a lot of customer service that comes with that, and like we are absolutely bad at that part of the business. Like I can't speak success in terms of like I'm doing it right, but I can speak success in terms of like I've seen a lot of ways to do it wrong because we've stumbled so many times, and we still continue to. And that's largely because like our team, me and my brother are the creatives, and it's hard to keep the creative ball rolling as fast as the business is trying to go half of the time,
Right.
and keeping up with that is hard. So but there's obviously more than that. The logistics of going to conventions and getting the word out about your games, and continuously making sure that you're engaged with content creators and influencers. That's such a big part of our business now. Also something we're like just kind of getting back into. With Gen Con, that was like really our first test of letting some other creators run our social media for a while, just to see how that worked. It worked well. Love to do that more, but again, trying to actually work out, how do I make all these things happen and make them happen with the timelines that I'm working with the products that I have coming out, because every sort of like piece of advertising and connection and engagement that you can do isn't going to work for every game at every moment in its release, right? So you have to think about what's important before release, right at release, and after, and how do we make all those things work and together.
Right.
When you have multiple products and multiple lines coming out kind of all at the same time, and that's where we accidentally screwed up, and we actually are basically releasing 2 games at once, not intentionally. But I was working on Hoop Gods alongside the Critical Care, which is the ICU game, and having 2 games release at the same time is not really smart, but that's where we find ourselves, and we got to get product out. So
Right.
it's a lot of management that feels a lot easier to take on, I think, in the beginning when you're just working on a couple things. But the moment that turns, one game turns into 6 that are in the pipeline, it's another ball game. And yeah, ideally you just have help.
Right. And I remember, and this is a funny story. I was like, I can tell you take a lot of care when you're creating your games. So, we're hanging out with some friends one night. We got some drinks, got some food on the table. I'm like, I got this new game, Rap Godz, let's check it out, because me and this group of friends just plays games.
Yeah.
So pull out the game. I open the box. I'm like, ooh, this is really nice. And I pick it back up and said, actually, we're not gonna play this tonight. I was like, I don't want y'all messing this game up. I was like, it's a little bit nicer than what
Oh my goodness.
than what the mood is for, because I'm one of those people. I keep my Funkos in the box.
I got you.
As just my comics are in sleeves, and then I go buy the digital version 2 and read the digital version,
Wow.
the
I'm learning a
physical.
lot about you.
I'm one of those people. I don't like my CDs scratched. Like,
Wow. Love it.
if I see a scratch, I'm like, oh, like it's like my OCD kicks in a little bit. Like, I guess like don't like that. So I saw Rap Guy was like, no, this is too nice for the occasion. This is gonna go with a different group of friends at a later date.
Yo, that's so funny. Oh man. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, it means yeah, we make good stuff, and not and we're trying to, we had in Rap Gods, we had the gold medallion,
Yep.
and that was kind of the signature piece in that. And that's another thing we're like, we for the gods games, I think we're trying to make a signature piece, and so or signature pieces, and we have something in Hoop Gods that I think is really nice and special. So I hope people respond to it the same way. It's something you interact with more during the game. I won't talk about it too much, it's getting in the weeds, but I think it's going to be fun and cool, and I think people will be surprised, which is what I care about.
Yeah, I think when you release a product that's high quality, people respect it a little bit more. They take it a little bit more seriously, and it just provides a different experience too. Like, I had that experience because of it. And it was like the funny moment. I was like, this is too good for the moment right now. Like, it's-
I mean, you probably can speak to that also, just like being a Black entrepreneur, like it means so much more when your quality is at 11,
yeah,
that I think, just especially in an industry like we are, where there's not a lot of Black folks, like we can't really like drop the ball when it comes to quality, because it just like it's a notch, right, that somebody can just take off of you and take off of your company, and it
right,
happens so quick and easy. We've found ways to screw up in other ways, but like, let's make sure that when you open the box, like, you are impressed. That's been our approach, and that's just that's our creative kind of like juices, making sure that they're well represented in the game itself.
right. And there's always the balance of you want to have that really high quality, but getting back into the logistics, the higher the quality, the higher the
Mhm.
price. And at
Yeah.
what point, is it feasible for the market because your price is too high, but you are providing that great product? There's always that line that you're kind of walking where you want to, put out the best product, but you want to make sure that your company's still sustainable as well.
Yeah, and I haven't figured out that part yet. We're we're
Right.
we're we're struggling just to make sure that we are a stable company. The next year will really prove that, when we have more product, and more of a pipeline that's actually working. But it's true, it's really hard to find that balance of quality versus affordability, and like what's possible, and at scale too, right? Usually that's how you make things cheaper, is to get larger scale. That's a
Yeah.
huge gamble for us, considering like we have a kind of untapped sort of market, where we're doing these kind of complex games about Black culture themes and Black history and stuff like that. And so our audience is not super familiar with the pricing of games or how a lot of that works sometimes. So now it's also a question of, I have to make sure my price point is acceptable, and like you can see the value immediately. Otherwise, we're not even going to be able to reach the audiences that we're trying to reach a lot of the time, because they're not used to paying $100 for a board game. I know
Right.
tons of people who are, but that's not necessarily the gamers who we're making our games for. So it's always kind of a little bit of a catch 22 to figure out what decision you're going to make. But I mean, so far we're sticking with our kind of gut reaction to a lot of things, because there's not a lot of people doing this specifically, and so far it's been okay. Hopefully it continues to be that way.
Right. Something I've noticed too, and I was telling you we did our first couple of like pop-ups at conventions. When you have that quality, you can't relay that quality quite the same online as you can in person, right? Like going back to my
No.
experience, I opened up Rap Godz and see it. and I very instantly know that I'm like, yeah, this is high quality, this is worth the money. Versus if I see it online, I can't feel it. I can't really see it the same way. I can't get that same experience. So that's always a challenge as well. Like we noticed that at the conventions, you know, easily able to sell, $40 t-shirts because the quality of it's nice and they can touch it, they can try
Yeah,
it on and see it next to them versus picture on a website doesn't quite give the same experience.
right, right.
So I definitely understand that as being like a big logistical challenge. And I think it's one of those things where you really just have to hit the road, get it in front of people, and then they feel more comfortable with it. Uh,
Yeah. And I mean, what you described, that's literally been our experience. And that's why we've done as many conventions as we have.
right,
Because I mean, it's quality in terms of the game and the game design itself too, right? Like when we show up, if I just say, oh, I have this hip hop game, there's not a lot of expectations about what that game is going to look like. So it's hard for somebody to assess, what kind of game is going to be, how much they should pay for it. Whereas if you say I'm making a farming game, people have a lot of expectations. And so
right.
you can borrow from those expectations to kind of pitch your product. Whereas like we can't do any of that. We got to lay it all on the table. Not so figuratively, but also figuratively.
It's interesting that you said farming because like I'm sitting there thinking like you got your Stardew Valleys, you got like your farm simulator, like you do have a lot of random like references for that.
Yeah, so you have pictures of what that's going to look like, and sometimes like how much you're willing to pay because you are familiar with sort of what that experience is like.
So as far as like other creators that are out there that might want to, get into creating board games, like how would you recommend that somebody get started if it is an area of interest for them?
I mean, that's actually the best part about the tabletop gaming industry is like you can legitimately just like make a game tomorrow and play it and test it with just like some index cards. Like the barrier to entry to actually get started is really really shallow. So
Yeah.
yeah, I tell everybody like make the game. It doesn't take much, and you don't have to make the product. You just have to make the game, and those are two very different things. All you need to do is make something that functions for you to understand basically how your game is going to work. Once you figure that out, there's a lot more questions that need to be asked, like how do you want to potentially publish it? But just getting started, and as a part of my tabletop mixtape project that I'm doing, I'm making one-page games, and I do that. I accompany it with a song, but the whole point for me is just I need to give myself a way to just sit down for 5-6 hours and make an entire game and give it to people just to have that experience that I remember when I was starting out in games. And I was like, oh, let me try this idea. And I like put that idea together. And when I'm involved in bigger projects, I don't often get a chance to do that. So that was my way to do that. But you can do the same thing. That's the challenge I gave myself. What can I do with one sheet of paper? We print it out, whether that's cutting something off the bottom and then you cut the pieces off the bottom and then the board is on the top, or it's more of a like RPG narrative game where you're just kind of filling bubbles out and then connecting dots and doing some calculations to see how you perform. Like all of those are games, and there's so much that you can do with one sheet of paper. So if you're just trying to get started, that's another place you can just go and look. There's tons of print and play games out there that are really small, and you can just experiment and try to do something similar like that. So um, just getting started is the easy part. So I would just say do it, and then see where it goes from there.
So the next layer up from there, what skills do you think they actually need to be successful in creating their game?
People skills. And I say that largely because you're either going to go two directions with the game. Like you need to be able to create a game, and that's great. Um, and you want to make a game that's good, and you'll have to play test with other people and get their feedback and understand what that feedback means and incorporate it into your design in order to most likely get to the level of polish that you're trying to get to. And then the next step after that, once you start kind of like testing it and putting it out there a little bit, it's going to be that decision of like, okay, well, if I want this to be a game that's a product that's out there in the world, how do I make that happen? And it's generally two ways. You're going to publish it yourself or you're going to get a publisher for it. If you're publishing it for yourself, then you need to understand how to connect with the people that you need to connect to create that game, which is largely, it's most likely going to depend on some sort of form of crowdfunding. Um, Unless you have, you know, some rich person that's just throwing money at you. And that's a whole nother project, right? Where you have to put yourself out there and relate to people and be able to get them to support you. And that was the one thing I did well, is I was out here talking about what I wanted to do with my games. And so people wanted to support that. Or you can take your design, package it up, and kind of flesh it out, and then pitch it to publishers. And that's really, it's presentation skills. When I talk to publishers who are listening to pitches about, you know, what they look for and what they respond to in pitches, it's people who know how to demonstrate the best parts of their game quickly, and they can do that and explain to a publisher who might see 20 pitches in 2 days. That's kind of sort of what happens at conventions. Like, why is yours worthy of being published? And so either way, you're going to have to pitch your game. You're either pitching it to a publisher, most likely, or you're pitching it to people who you want to support you. So coming up with that solid, this is my game and this is what makes it sing and why you need it, is super, super crucial in either direction.
I gotta imagine, you know, those moments that you were talking about earlier, like being able to articulate how you create those moments within the game is what's gonna, at least to some extent, set you apart when you are doing those pitches as well.
Oh yeah, describing, you know, the most fun moments in the game is really important. Publishers are often, you know, very keen on, are you telling them exactly like who the target audience for your game is? A lot of people want to get out there and say everybody can play this game. Honestly, that's not desirable to publishers. Like the way marketing and the way the internet works now, you can tap into communities and niches a lot more easier than you can hit broad markets. So it's like, I'm bringing this game and it's going to work well for these people in these age ranges, and that will be responded to, I think, better than, oh yeah, this works for all ages and anybody can play it. It's like, that's great, and I mean, that's generally, accessibility is what we want in all games, but you should have a target and you should understand who exactly your game is made for, and makes for a much better pitch, I think.
Right. Speaking of community, you know, what are the best, you know, conventions for board gamers to attend in your opinion?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of them. My favorite still is probably PAX Unplugged. Um, I felt like the Penny Arcade and PAX, like generally, because they were doing conventions all over the place, and the fact that they kind of transitioned and created something that was purely just for board games when they already knew what they were doing, and um, and already focused on community, right? Because it was a website that kind of like had grew, or comic websites that grew a community, and now they're just building spaces for their community. So I think that's one reason PAX Unplugged has always been my favorite. But there's some great other ones out there. OrcaCon is one that's in Seattle. That's also fabulous in terms of accessibility. Like they make sure that that convention feels good to all the people in attendance as best that they can. It was the first convention I ever went to that had a BIPOC lounge. It was the first convention that I went to that had space between all the tables, potentially for wheelchairs or walkers. Things like that. Like I haven't seen a lot of cons take the care of all of their attendees as I have seen in other places. So OrcaCon is super high on my list too. And then Big Bad Con is one in LA that I've heard is really good. I haven't been able to make it out to yet, but it's top on my list for I think next year, making sure that I go and see, because I think that one is also one that has a really inclusive, super just interested community in what they're doing. And I want to say it's more RPG slash sort of like, but I'm not sure about that. I hope they have good board game presence too. But I just want to go because I've heard it's just a really positive convention.
Need to make it out to the West Coast a little bit more next year myself.
Yeah.
Um,
I want to put BlerdCon on that list too. We got to amp up the board game side a little bit. I'm working on it. I'm going to be in there next year.
got like I don't know. It's almost like you know where some of the next questions are going before I
Uh-oh.
go in this. So in general, how do you think we could increase participation in board gaming and tabletop, specifically in the Blerd community?
I honestly like, I love what the conventions are doing. A lot of conventions are better about it. Like I saw things at Gen Con in terms of just inclusiveness and trying to make sure that there's better safe spaces at the convention, but also specific events, and just like that was huge. And I think that's important, but I feel like the most impactful stuff is actually going to be smaller and on the local level. And so, in I used to run game nights all the time. And now when I think about running game nights, I'm like, well, I think I want to start with just like having game nights kind of at my house, and just inviting my Black and queer friends, like create that and try to grow from that, potentially, where if you start with I think the people that you want in that small setting, and then grow from there, and then eventually you have enough interest in your local community where people are interested in going to cons and stuff like that, and then you can start going places together. So I think, anybody who is out there like in the Black community or in any marginalized community, creating those types of people centric gaming environments and trying to grow them, I think we'll start to see a lot more. And I mean, honestly, that I feel like half of that is going to be with games. The more, like, my brother had a Rap Godz crew, and they would play every night, and sometimes they would have people waiting. They would have like 8 people there, and whoever loses has to get off the game, right? And so they built that out just on their own because they enjoyed the game. So the more we can get games that connect those communities together, I think that ultimately is gonna be the long-term solution for making it better.
And last question, and tying into that a bit too. How do you think that companies and the community in general could help Black game developers?
Hire them. But it's tricky, right? Like, in the tabletop industry, it's happening a lot more in RPGs now. I feel like I've seen um, development houses and RPGs, like they're able, because of their business model, where they like hire game designers more frequently. In board games, it's a little bit backwards in like, we're creating games and then pitching them. It's not like we're hiring you to make a game, right? So it's a little upside down in that way. So it's harder for some industries, I think, to do it. There's not a lot of game design jobs out there on the board game and card game side. There's more now. For Tessa Elise, Black game designer who works for Funko now, is in one of those spots. So they do exist, but they're few and far between. So and potentially that's it. Is maybe we need more of those positions and less of, just people pitching their games all over the place. And the struggle with that model is that we have, if that is the way that board games works, like generally speaking, where you create a game, you have to do it entirely on your own, at your own expense, on your own time, on your own dime, and then have something that is ready to go. And basically you have to put in all the effort to pitch it however many times it takes, And then if you eventually get something signed, then you get paid. There's so much upfront work required to do that without being paid. Like that's a huge barrier that sometimes I feel like gets a little bit overlooked, is that, well, why don't we see as many game designers that are Black? And maybe it's because you're requiring all this upfront work with no pay, right? In order to actually make it into the industry. And I mean, I try to fight back on that as much as I can, just on my own. I don't like putting a ton of effort into games before I pitch them because of that, right? Like I still have to eat. So it's, you know, if I'm making games and spending time on things, I'm trying to make it on the stuff that I'm doing, or building up my own products. But realistically, I have to diversify. So even me, I'm a person who's been in the industry for a while. It's still hard for me to keep pace and keep on track and try to keep, you know, engaged in the industry in a way that will actually support me doing it full time. So yeah, if there are places and ways, and I would say, you know, it's about design and development, but it's also about all the other things too. Like I would hope that we would have a lot of Black folks who were also interested in the marketing side. Like we need a marketing person, right? Like where's the Black creator out there who is interested in games, who is equally excited about marketing? There's those positions are way more available. You have a lot of the logistics stuff that's available. Like you want to work in the game industry, there's opportunities. Like we can't always just look at the design part. Like unless design is specifically your passion, but for a lot of people it's just games, and there's a lot more opportunity in games just more broadly.
No, that definitely makes sense. And you know, I've been in tech for almost my whole career, and like I tell people kind of the same thing. Like, you know, you don't have to be some developer coder to
Yeah.
be in tech. There's, you know, all these other jobs. There's finance, there's sales, there's customer success. There's,
Hmm.
you know, all these things you could be doing that are adjacent to just, you know, being somebody that's creating code, right? You don't need to
Yeah.
necessarily go down that route. And some of them are just as lucrative, if not more, you know, than
Yeah.
being a person actually.
No, I have a friend who's a lawyer at one of the biggest video game studios in North Carolina. So
Right.
I know exactly what you mean. Like, yeah. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of different opportunity out there, and hopefully it grows. There's not a ton, but it is growing. The industry is growing. So I hope to see more of those positions open up and be
Yeah.
available for folks.
Cool. Well, that's what I had for you today. Like, I always appreciate when you take the time to talk to me. It's always an interesting conversation. So, Amari, you know, thank you from not only me, but even everybody at Blerd. We always appreciate, you know, creators taking the time to speak with us. So, you know, can't say anything more than, you know, thank you a ton for the time.
Yeah, and I mean, I really appreciate y'all, and seriously, everything you do. It's been so fun. I mean, we talked a long time ago, just like getting to see the progression of the website and how many people y'all are connecting with now. It's just inspirational for me to kind of know that there's audiences out here that I want to reach, that I want to be speaking to, that you're already doing a great job at. And so, you know, we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
Got to make some games. It's just a crazy business.
There you
Just got to make some fun stuff.
go.